The year was 1815. London had scarcely caught its breath after the wars, and yet its drawing-rooms already trembled with another kind of battle, one fought with whispers, glances, and silk. The season had begun, and the great chandeliers of Mayfair burned brighter than ever, as if to chase away the lingering shadow of Europe's grief. Beneath their glitter stood Lady Eleanor Whitcombe, daughter of the late Earl of Grafton, whose fortune had vanished as swiftly as his breath on that cold February morning. Her gown, though graceful, betrayed its age, ivory silk recut from an earlier season, the hem discreetly lengthened, the pearls on her bodice borrowed from her mother's dwindling collection. To the unkind eye, she was a relic among debutantes who gleamed like fresh coin. The orchestra struck a waltz, and Eleanor smiled with careful composure, though her pulse throbbed with humiliation. Once she had been the envy of the ton, now she was its warning. A pair of dowagers whispered behind their fans. Poor thing, one sighed. Her father gambled more than he governed. And that engagement to Viscount Trevelyan, broken, wasn't it? The other nodded, pity sharpening into malice. He discovered her dowry was smoke. Even charm must have its price. The laughter that followed was soft, poisonous, and deliberate enough for Eleanor to hear. She lifted her chin as though the music itself had beckoned her above the cruelty. Dignity, she told herself, was her last inheritance, and she would not squander it. Her mother, seated against the far wall, offered a wan smile that failed to hide desperation. They both knew what this evening meant. One final attempt to restore a name before society's doors closed for good. Near the edge of the room, a man watched in silence. Alexander Everhart, the newly titled Duke of Ashbourne, stood tall among the crowd, yet apart from it. His dark attire was plain for a duke, the austerity of his black coat almost somber against the glittering assembly. Rumor claimed he had inherited both the title and a fortune crippled by scandal, his father's debts, his brother's death at Waterloo, and the heavy shadow of duty. Few dared to approach him. His composure carried the quiet authority of one who had endured too much to care for gossip. His gaze lingered on Eleanor, not with idle curiosity but with a grave attentiveness. There was something defiant in the way she stood among her detractors, as if her very stillness challenged the room to look away first. When her dance card remained conspicuously blank, he noticed the slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her glove. He recognized that gesture. He had seen it in soldiers who faced humiliation with unbroken pride. Eleanor pretended not to feel the chill of isolation. Each time a gentleman passed her by, she laughed softly, as though declining by choice. When the music ceased, she slipped toward the terrace for air, her slippers whispering against marble. The night was cool, the garden below dusted with mist. From within came the muffled hum of conversation, her name, she suspected, among the syllables of scandal. The door creaked, and a voice, low and steady, reached her. "The night does not deserve such sorrow, my lady." She turned. The Duke of Ashbourne stood in the doorway, the lamplight tracing the solemn line of his jaw. "Your Grace," she murmured, curtsying instinctively. "I did not realize I was intruding upon your solitude." "You are not," he replied. "I find solitude overrated, and this air kinder than most company inside." He stepped onto the terrace beside her, offering the faintest bow. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, merely tentative, like two travelers measuring distance across a bridge not yet built. Eleanor drew her shawl closer. "London does not forgive easily," she said, attempting a wry smile. "Nor forget," he answered. "It prefers its villains familiar." He studied her profile, the pale resolve in her expression. "You endure their scrutiny with remarkable grace." "Grace is all I have left," she said before she could stop herself. Her cheeks flushed, but the honesty of it seemed to move him. He produced a handkerchief, embroidered with a crest faded by time, and offered it with quiet ceremony. "Then let it not be wasted on tears unworthy of you." She hesitated, then accepted it, the fabric warm from his hand. "You are kind, Your Grace." though I imagine kindness in this city is a limited resource. Perhaps, he said softly, but even the rarest coin has its use. His gaze, steady and without presumption, held hers long enough to still her trembling. For a moment, the noise of the ballroom vanished, leaving only the rustle of the garden and the steady rhythm of two hearts remembering what gentleness felt like. He inclined his head. "Good evening, Lady Eleanor." "And to you," she replied, though her voice wavered. When he returned inside, the air seemed colder without him. She pressed the handkerchief to her lips, surprised by the faint scent of cedar and something older, memory, perhaps. For the first time that evening, her shame eased into something softer, curiosity. The music resumed, and she lingered a moment longer beneath the stars before re-entering the room. Whispers greeted her instantly. "Did you see?" someone murmured. The Duke spoke to her, alone. Another voice hissed, "It cannot be serious. He needs an heiress, not a pauper." The words stung, but she walked past them with quiet dignity, her spine unbent. Yet as she crossed the ballroom, she saw him once more across the crowd. He was speaking to no one, merely watching her as though assessing a decision. That night, when she returned home, her mother was waiting by the dying fire. "You spoke with the Duke of Ashbourne?" she asked, half hope, half fear. "Briefly," Eleanor answered. She could still feel the warmth of his handkerchief in her palm. He was courteous. Her mother's eyes shone with exhausted longing. "Perhaps fortune smiles yet." Eleanor said nothing. She ascended the staircase to her room, each step echoing against the hollowness of their once proud townhouse. The candlelight trembled across faded portraits, faces that had once commanded Parliament, estates, admiration. Now only their ghosts remained to witness her fatigue. She placed the handkerchief upon her dressing table and regarded it as one might a relic from a kinder world. In its folds lay a question she dared not form aloud. Had he pitied her or seen her? Outside, the carriages rumbled away from another evening of triumphs and small devastations. In one of them, Alexander sat in silence, his thoughts circling the same image, a young woman on a terrace, unbowed by the cruelty that sought to break her. For reasons he could not yet name, he found her courage more radiant than any chandelier that night. London slept beneath its fog of gossip and perfume, but in two separate houses, two souls stirred from apathy into something unfamiliar, something dangerous. By morning, the story of their brief encounter would ripple through parlors and breakfast tables, embroidered by tongues eager for scandal. Yet beneath the embroidery of lies lay a single, quiet truth. Neither of them would forget. And so the season continued, dances, debts, and whispered wagers, but for Lady Eleanor Whitcombe and the Duke of Ashbourne, the game had changed. Somewhere between survival and surrender, a seed had been planted. Whether it would bloom or burn was yet to be seen. Morning came with a faint drizzle over London, the kind that blurred the city's sharp edges and made even gossip sound muted. Yet within every parlor and tea-room, the same refrain echoed, Lady Eleanor Whitcombe had been seen alone with the Duke of Ashbourne. The scandal rippled like perfume through silk-draped rooms, equal parts curiosity and cruelty. Some called it a pity, others a strategy. But all agreed, desperation was a dangerous perfume for a woman without fortune. Eleanor endured the whispers with her habitual restraint. Each word stung, yet none drew blood. Her mother's health had grown frail under the strain of their dwindling means, and the thought of failure now tasted bitterer than pride. She told herself she would not care what was said, until an embossed card arrived 3 days later, its seal bearing the Ashbourne crest. The Duke requested her company at his townhouse for tea. Her mother's trembling hands smoothed the parchment as if it were holy writ. "This could mend everything," she whispered. "You must go, Eleanor. Whatever he seeks, meet it with grace." Eleanor did not trust fortune. It had a habit of smiling before the fall. Still she went. Ashbourne House stood like a fortress among the manicured avenues of Grosvenor Square, its facade of grey stone untouched by fashion, its windows curtained with discretion. A butler led her through corridors lined with portraits, stern ancestors gazing down as if to measure her worth. The drawing-room was warm, the fire softening the austerity of the place. Alexander stood near the hearth, his presence filling the space more than the fire did. He greeted her with a bow of impeccable formality, yet his voice retained the same gentleness she remembered from that night on the terrace. "Lady Eleanor, I trust you have recovered from society's interest." "I have grown accustomed to it, your grace," she replied, folding her hands with composure, "though I fear it is not yet accustomed to me." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Then perhaps it never shall. I have found that London prefers its tragedies familiar." He gestured toward a seat, and she obliged, careful not to let her curiosity show. On the table between them rested a tea service, untouched, and a single folded document. He regarded her in silence for a moment before speaking. "I am not one for ornament, Lady Eleanor, so I will speak plainly. I have a proposal to make, though not of the romantic sort." Her breath caught, though she masked it behind an even tone. "A proposal, your grace?" He inclined his head. "A marriage of convenience. My estate, as you may have heard, suffers from certain financial and reputational difficulties. My late father's indiscretions and my brother's death have left matters untidy. A union with a lady of impeccable character would steady the name." She understood instantly. "And my family's fall from grace would be softened by your title." "Yes," he admitted. "It would serve us both. You would be protected from further humiliation. I would preserve the dignity of my house. No one need speak of affection. It is a transaction, if you find the terms acceptable." Eleanor stared at the flames. Marriage had once been the promise of affection, of partnership. Now it was arithmetic. Yet she felt no insult in his tone, only candor. There was something almost respectful in the way he stripped illusion away. "And what," she asked quietly, "would you expect of me beyond the performance of appearances?" "Only sincerity," he said. "I would not have you pretend affection, nor tolerate cruelty. The estate in Hampshire requires a mistress of sense and steadiness, not sentiment." His gaze softened. "And I believe, Lady Eleanor, that beneath your reserve lies precisely that." Her eyes flicked to the document upon the table. "You have already drafted the arrangement?" He nodded once. "A formal outline, inheritance provisions, separate accounts, your mother's comfort secured at Grafton Lodge." It was meticulous, even generous. He had thought of everything except love. For that omission, she found herself oddly grateful. She had learned to mistrust affection when it came clothed in obligation. She studied him, this man whose restraint felt both armor and prison. His voice carried the measured calm of someone long acquainted with disappointment. Perhaps, she thought, this union was less a bargain than a truce between two weary hearts. "You ask for sincerity," she said at last. "Then allow me to offer it. I do not love you, your grace, nor do I imagine I ever might. But I respect what you propose. If you seek an alliance founded on dignity rather than deception, then I will accept." His expression did not change, yet something eased in his eyes, as if a weight had shifted. He rose and extended his hand. "Then let us seal what reason has chosen. You have my word, Lady Eleanor, you will never regret your courage." When their hands met, the moment held an unexpected solemnity. His touch was steady, not warm, yet the simplicity of it stirred something she could not name. The engagement was announced within the week. Society reacted as it always did, with delight at the scandal it pretended to despise. The union of a fallen lady and a widowed duke was fodder too rich to ignore. Some whispered of calculation, others of desperation, but none dared question the power of the title that now hovered above her name. On their wedding day, the sky hung pale and expectant. Eleanor stood before the mirror in her mother's modest townhouse, wearing a gown of white muslin overlaid with lace borrowed from a cousin. There was no extravagance, only quiet determination. When her mother fastened the final pearl at her throat, tears glimmered unspoken. Ashbourne awaited her at the altar of St. George's, his expression carved in composure. The ceremony was brief, almost austere. When he placed the ring upon her finger, his hand trembled only slightly. "I give you my name," he said in a low voice, audible only to her, not as a cage, but as shelter. Her reply was steady. "Then I will keep it as one who knows the cost of roofs." The congregation murmured approval as they turned to face it together. To the world, it was a union of prudence. To them, it was an unspoken pact to survive with dignity. That evening, the reception glittered with borrowed joy. Candlelight shimmered across gold-rimmed glass, and laughter disguised envy. Eleanor moved through it all like a figure carved from porcelain, polite, poised, untouchable. The Duke watched her from across the room, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he offered a slight nod, almost an apology for the performance they both endured. Later, when the last guest had departed and the music faded into silence, he presented her with a small velvet box. Inside lay a delicate locket, the gold dulled by age. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "A token not of affection, but of promise. For now." Eleanor closed her fingers around it. "For now," she echoed, unsure whether the words were comfort or caution. That night, as she sat before the window of their new home, the moonlight pooled across her gown like a benediction and a warning both. Below, London slept, indifferent, watchful, merciless. She touched the locket at her throat, feeling the faint pulse beneath it. In marrying him, she had secured survival. Yet as the clock chimed midnight, she sensed another truth stirring in the quiet. Survival and happiness were not the same thing. The man she had wed was both mystery and mirror, his restraint reflecting her own. Whether it would bind them or break them, she could not tell. But for the first time since ruin had found her, Eleanor Whitcombe felt not powerless, but poised at the edge of something vast, an uncertain future that asked to be earned, not inherited. Winter settled over Hampshire with a quiet, relentless grace, the kind that blurred boundaries between house and horizon. Ashbourne Manor stood like a solemn sentinel amid the frost-laden fields, its chimneys breathing faint curls of smoke into the pale sky. Within its walls, Lady Eleanor moved through rooms heavy with history, rooms that still whispered the names of those who had come before her. The grandeur that had once intimidated her now felt almost kind, though the silence pressed close, reminding her how vast loneliness could be when gilded with privilege. Her marriage to Alexander had entered its fourth month. They shared civility, even comfort, but not intimacy. Their lives intersected at dinner, in the measured rituals of correspondence, and in the polite exchanges that filled the hours between dusk and candlelight. She had come to admire his restraint, his unwavering courtesy, his discipline, but it puzzled her too. A man so capable of kindness seemed equally determined to keep tenderness at bay. Most evenings he worked in his study, the door closed, lamplight spilling beneath it like a confession he refused to make. When she passed by, she often heard the faint scratch of his pen or, more rarely, the melancholy strains of a pianoforte played with startling skill. He never mentioned it, and she never asked. The sound seemed too private, as though it belonged to a grief still raw. The servants spoke of his late brother in lowered tones, Captain Thomas Everhart, killed at Waterloo, the pride of the family and the joy of his mother's heart. Eleanor gathered fragments of this ghost as one might assemble a portrait from broken glass. A soldier's courage, a gentleman's laughter, a memory her husband could neither bury nor share. One evening, as rain traced delicate rivers across the windows, Eleanor lingered outside the music-room, drawn by that haunting melody. It was a slow piece, tender but incomplete, each note trailing into silence before it could resolve. She hesitated at the threshold, her breath catching as she saw Alexander seated at the piano, his head bowed, the candlelight cutting across his face. For the first time, his composure seemed human, creased by sorrow, softened by remembrance. She stepped forward quietly. "It is beautiful," she said. He started, his hands faltering over the keys. "You should not have heard that." "Why?" she asked gently. "It is no crime to play. It is when the music belongs to the dead." His voice was low, almost brittle. He rose, turning away as though ashamed of being seen without his armor. Eleanor approached, her gaze steady. "It belonged to your brother." He nodded once. "It was his composition. He played it before." The words broke apart, unfinished. "I can never seem to complete it." "Perhaps it was never meant to be completed," she said softly. "Perhaps it was only meant to be remembered." He looked at her then, truly looked, and she saw the weariness in his eyes, the kind born not of age but of endurance. "You speak as though remembrance is a gift," he murmured. "For some of us, it is a prison. And yet you keep playing," she said. "You keep the door closed, but you still play. That is not prison, Alexander. That is longing." Her use of his name startled them both. The intimacy of it lingered between them like a breath they were afraid to exhale. He moved closer, studying her face as though testing the truth of her words. "You read too much in what is only habit." "Then why defend it?" she asked, her tone quiet but unyielding. He almost smiled, a faint, sorrowful curve of the mouth. "Because habit is safer than hope." Eleanor's heart clenched. She understood that sentiment more than she wished to. For weeks she had performed the role of dutiful duchess, balancing ledgers, visiting tenants, managing correspondence, all with a precision that masked her uncertainty. But beneath that discipline lived a restlessness she could not name. It stirred when she watched him, when his voice softened unexpectedly, when his restraint became a kind of plea for release. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the piano. "Your brother would not have wanted silence to be your inheritance." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You speak of what you cannot know." "Then tell me," she urged. "Tell me what you cannot forgive yourself for." The question seemed to wound him. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "He died saving men under my command. It was I who urged him forward that day. I who watched from the ridge as the smoke swallowed him. The reports called it valor. I call it penance." Eleanor felt the weight of his words settle in the space between them. No courtly phrase could soften such confession. She wanted to touch him, but the gravity of his sorrow made even comfort feel presumptuous. Still, she stepped nearer. "Grief is not loyalty, Alexander. It is love refusing to accept its own endurance. You honor him by living, not by withering beside his memory." His eyes glistened, though he blinked it away. "You speak like someone who has practiced forgiveness." "I have practiced survival," she replied. "Forgiveness is a luxury I hope to learn." He looked at her for a long time, and in that silence something shifted, a mutual recognition, raw and fragile. The distance that had defined their union thinned, replaced by a trembling awareness neither could dismiss. When she turned to leave, he caught her wrist, not roughly, but with the desperation of someone reaching for light. "Stay," he said. The word carried no command, only need. She stayed. They sat together on the bench, the candle flickering between them. He placed his hand upon the keys once more, and this time she joined him, her touch tentative. Together, they completed the final phrase of the melody. The harmony that emerged was imperfect, but in its imperfection lay something profoundly human. When the last note faded, he did not withdraw his hand. "If this is duty," he whispered, "then I have misunderstood duty all my life." Eleanor's heart answered before her lips could. "Then perhaps it is time to learn anew." The moment hung suspended, fragile as spun glass. Their faces were close enough for breath to mingle, yet neither dared to claim the space between them. It was he who bridged it first, a hesitant kiss, reverent rather than passionate, the kind born not of impulse but recognition. When they parted, the world seemed hushed, as if the manor itself had exhaled after years of holding its breath. Eleanor rose slowly, her pulse unsteady. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night," he replied, though his voice carried a depth she had not heard before, a vow, a question, perhaps both. She left him there among the shadows and the echo of unfinished music. In her chamber, she found her reflection transformed, not by beauty, but by something quieter, an inward light. The locket at her throat gleamed faintly in the candle's glow, as though answering a promise newly forged. Below, Alexander remained at the piano, fingers resting on the silent keys. He felt neither peace nor torment, only the strange, fragile calm of a man who had confessed without words. The storm outside had ceased, leaving the world wrapped in stillness. Somewhere beyond that stillness dawn waited. And with it, he suspected, consequences neither of them yet understood. The thaw came late that year, as though the land itself hesitated to relinquish its hold on sorrow. By the time the first crocuses pushed through the soil, Ashbourne Manor had regained a semblance of calm, but the stillness between its inhabitants carried a new kind of tension, no longer the chill of distance, but the fragile heat of something unnamed. The night of the piano lingered between Eleanor and Alexander like a secret neither could voice without breaking it. They spoke with the same composure as before, yet their glances lingered, their silences deepened. Every shared breakfast, every evening stroll through the frost-soft gardens hummed with unspoken recognition. But peace, she would soon learn, is rarely permitted to those who find contentment outside society's permission. The letter arrived on a pale morning, sealed with red wax and the unmistakable crest of the London Gazette. Eleanor broke it open with trembling fingers. Inside lay a clipping, an accusation printed in elegant venom. His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne, it is whispered, has trafficked sympathy with Bonapartist exiles, and that his estates have harbored those who once served under the Corsican usurper. Beneath it, scrawled in an anonymous hand, were the words, "Loyalty, it seems, may wear treason's mask." Her breath caught. The words were not mere gossip, they were poison. In a city still reeling from war, such a rumor could destroy him. She brought the letter to Alexander immediately. He read it once, without expression, then folded it with careful precision and set it aside. "It was inevitable," he said quietly. "There are those who would see Ashbourne humbled further. My father's debts, my brother's death, they have given vultures cause to circle." "But this is slander," she protested. "Surely no one will believe it." He looked at her then, with the weary calm of one who had long understood the fickleness of reputation. Truth is rarely required when envy serves as evidence. His restraint unnerved her. "You will defend yourself publicly?" He hesitated. "To defend is to dignify accusation. I will write to the Home Office privately. It is best handled in silence." Eleanor knew the logic was sound, yet it filled her with dread. Silence was precisely what the world mistook for guilt. As the days passed, more letters arrived, anonymous, vicious, each feeding the same narrative. Servants whispered, friends withdrew invitations, and newspapers printed innuendo as if it were fact. Eleanor bore it with composure in public, but at night, when the household slept, she felt the humiliation burn like fever. She had married to escape scandal, not to inherit another. Yet when she looked at her husband, sitting solitary in his study, she found pity overshadowed by admiration. His dignity did not falter. He bore disgrace with the same steadiness he bore affection, with quiet, disciplined grace. Still, she could not abide helplessness. In London, rumor thrived on silence, truth demanded proof. Through discreet inquiry, she traced the source of the whispers to a familiar name, Viscount Trevelyan, the man who had once been her suitor. The discovery made her blood run cold. Trevelyan had lost heavily to her father at cards before the Earl's ruin. His vanity had suffered a blow when their engagement ended, and he had since made it his pastime to remind society of her family's fall. That he now sought to wound her husband as well seemed both plausible and cruelly poetic. When she told Alexander what she suspected, he frowned. Trevelyan would not risk such malice openly. "Then I shall not confront him openly," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. He rose from his desk, his tone low but firm. "You will do no such thing. To chase scandal is to become its prey." She met his gaze without flinching. "And to ignore it is to invite ruin. If I can end this, I must." He stared at her for a long moment, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "Eleanor, you underestimate the cruelty of men who mistake your grace for weakness." "Then let them learn otherwise," she said, and left before he could answer. The following afternoon, beneath the pretext of visiting a milliner, she traveled to London. The city greeted her with its familiar blend of perfume and deceit. She found Trevelyan at his club, smiling, surrounded by sycophants. When he saw her, surprise flickered across his face before dissolving into amusement. "My dear Lady Ashbourne," he drawled, "I confess I did not expect your presence in such modest surroundings." She ignored the barb. "I came because I know what you have done. Your letters, your insinuations, they end now." His smirk widened. "Ah, so the Duke sends his Duchess as envoy. How gallant! But you must understand, my lady, reputation is a delicate fabric. Once torn—" Eleanor cut him off. "You speak of fabric as though you had ever mended any. I ask only that you cease this cowardice. Retract what you have sown." He leaned back in his chair, feigning indifference. "And if I do not?" She drew from her reticule a single folded paper. "Then I deliver this. It contains your own letters to my father, proof of your debts, your forgery, and your subsequent lies. I believe the magistrate would find them enlightening." His expression faltered, color draining from his face. "You would not dare." "I would," she said. "For the sake of my husband, I would." The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. At last, Trevelyan's arrogance wilted into resignation. "You have grown formidable, Lady Ashbourne." "I have grown tired," she replied and turned to leave. By dusk she was home. Her hands shook as she entered the drawing-room, where Alexander stood by the fire. He looked up, and before he could speak, she placed the packet of letters upon the mantel. "It is done," she said simply. He stared at her, astonished. "You went to him?" "Yes. And I would again, if it meant protecting your name." He crossed the room in 2 strides. "Do you realize what you risked? Alone, in that viper's den, Eleanor, you might have destroyed yourself." "I was already destroyed once," she said quietly. "You gave me a name worth defending. I could not stand by while it was dragged through the mud." For a moment, anger battled gratitude in his expression. Then, slowly, his hands fell to his sides, and the fury drained from him. "They may call you reckless," he said softly, "but I call you brave enough to love a man unworthy of you." The admission stunned her. He stepped closer, his voice unsteady now. "When I asked for a union of convenience, I did not imagine devotion. And yet you have shown me what I did not dare ask for, faith." Eleanor felt her composure falter, her throat tighten. "It was never faith, Alexander. It was simply refusing to let the world win." Outside, rain began to fall, a cleansing rain, gentle against the windows. He reached for her hand, and she let him. The warmth between them was no longer restrained but alive, pulsing with shared defiance. "Whatever they say of me," he murmured, "let them. I have your courage to answer for it." She looked at him then, not as husband or duke, but as the man who had finally allowed himself to feel. "Then let us face them together," she said. He drew her into his arms, and for the first time, neither duty nor fear stood between them. The storm outside deepened, but within the walls of Ashbourne something long, dormant stirred to life, a love tempered by trial, steady as the flame that refused to be extinguished. By morning, London would whisper again, but this time, it would not find them unprepared. Dawn crept over London like a reluctant confession, pale and uncertain, gilding the rooftops with a light too fragile to promise hope. The city was stirring when the royal summons arrived at Ashbourne Manor, a letter sealed in the crimson wax of Carlton House. Its contents were brief, cold, and absolute. His Royal Highness the Prince Regent requests the presence of the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne to answer matters concerning the integrity of His Majesty's subjects and estates. Eleanor read the words twice, then looked to Alexander. He stood by the window, unreadable as stone, though the faint tremor in his hand betrayed what pride would not admit. "So it comes to this," he said quietly. "The court will expect an explanation, and I have none that will satisfy them." "You have the truth," she replied, forcing steadiness into her voice. "It must be enough." He turned toward her then, his expression softened by something that looked like sorrow. "Truth is a currency they spend only when convenient." Eleanor reached for his arm, her resolve steady. "Then I shall speak it for you. They will not hang your honor upon silence." He studied her for a long moment, as though memorizing her. "You are remarkable," he murmured. "But promise me this, if their judgment turns cruel, do not defend me at the cost of your own name." She met his gaze without wavering. "My name has survived ruin, Alexander. It can endure loyalty." By noon, their carriage rattled through the streets toward Carlton House. The city outside seethed with curiosity. Faces turned, whispers followed, and the clatter of hooves echoed like the rhythm of accusation itself. Eleanor sat upright, gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. The world might have seen a duchess on her way to disgrace. She felt instead like a woman walking toward a reckoning she had already accepted. Inside the grand halls of the regent's residence, chandeliers blazed with the cruel beauty of ceremony. Courtiers lined the walls, their eyes sharp with delight at the spectacle. At the dais sat the Prince Regent, his features arranged into a mask of benevolent boredom. Beside him, advisers murmured, their words thin and venomous. Alexander bowed deeply, the picture of composure. Eleanor followed suit, her gown rustling softly against the marble floor. "Your Grace," the regent began, his tone heavy with practiced civility, "grave reports reach us that you have provided refuge to men of questionable allegiance, former officers of the enemy, it seems." Alexander's reply was calm. "I have provided refuge only to widows and children, Your Royal Highness. War may end by treaty, but suffering does not." A murmur rippled through the audience. The regent's brow furrowed in mild irritation. Charity, however noble, must not trespass upon loyalty. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She could see how the conversation was turning, how easily compassion was being reframed as treason. Alexander's restraint, once his strength, now endangered him. One adviser leaned forward. "If it please your Highness, the Duke's defense sounds almost rehearsed. Perhaps the Duchess might confirm the extent of her husband's generosity." The regent's gaze slid toward Eleanor, curious. "Indeed. Let us hear from the Duchess herself." "You have been much discussed, madam." The room stilled. Every pair of eyes turned toward her, waiting for a misstep. She felt the weight of history pressing against her shoulders, yet when she spoke, her voice carried the calm of conviction. "My husband has given sanctuary to those forgotten by peace," she said. "If compassion is to be counted among crimes, then I pray England learns to sin with grace." A startled hush followed. Somewhere near the dais, a stifled laugh broke the tension. Even the regent's expression faltered into reluctant amusement. "You speak boldly, Duchess." "I speak plainly, Your Highness," she replied. "We have buried too many sons not to recognize mercy when it stands at our door." Alexander glanced at her, awe flickering beneath his composure. For the first time, he saw not the woman rescued by his proposal, but the equal he had unknowingly sought all along. The regent reclined, considering. "England thrives on reputation, not righteousness. Yet I find myself entertained by your candor." He gestured lazily to his advisers. "Strike this matter from the record. Let it not be said that our courts condemn kindness." The advisers protested, but a single wave of his jeweled hand silenced them. The audience was over. Outside, the spring air felt impossibly clean. Eleanor exhaled, her shoulders loosening for the first time in weeks. Alexander stood beside her, silent, until at last he said, "You have done what I could not. You have made truth undeniable." She smiled faintly. "You gave it dignity, Alexander. I only gave it voice." They returned to Ashbourne that evening beneath a sky washed pale by twilight. The countryside, green again after months of frost, seemed to breathe with them. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy them dissolved like mist, leaving behind only the quiet astonishment of survival. Days passed into weeks, and spring unfolded in earnest. The gardens bloomed wildly, as though making up for lost time. Eleanor found herself walking there often, her fingers grazing blossoms heavy with scent. Life had resumed its rhythm, yet something within her had shifted. Love, once a distant luxury, had become something solid, earned through adversity. One afternoon, she found Alexander by the stables, sleeves rolled, tending to a restless horse. The image startled her, this man of poise and formality transformed into one of quiet labor. He looked up, smiling faintly. "She refuses the bit. Stubborn creature. Perhaps she simply dislikes restraint," Eleanor said. He laughed softly. "Then she and her mistress are alike." The remark carried warmth, not mockery. She stepped closer. "You no longer call me your ally in duty." "No," he said, meeting her gaze. "Because duty cannot hold what I feel now." He paused, searching for words worthy of their honesty. "When I asked you to marry me, I thought I sought redemption for my family's name. Instead, I found it in your courage. You have reminded me that honor means nothing if it cannot endure love." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "And love, Alexander?" "Love," he said, taking her hand, "is the only rebellion worth our ruin." The simplicity of it undid her. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the happiness they had both feared to claim. The world could gossip, misjudge, or forget them entirely. What mattered now was the truth they had built between them, something that could neither be bought nor silenced. As evening descended, they walked through the fields, the manor behind them glowing in the soft gold of sunset. The air smelled of rain and new earth, and the sound of distant bells carried through the valley. Eleanor turned to him, her voice quiet. "Do you think the world will remember us kindly?" He smiled, the answer gentle. "History seldom remembers kindness, but perhaps it will remember endurance." She leaned against him, content in the stillness that followed. Above them, the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky. In years to come, when strangers spoke of the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne, they would speak of scandal, of redemption, of a union that began in convenience and ended in devotion. But within those whispered accounts, something truer endured, the knowledge that love, when stripped of pretense and pride, could outlast even the cruelties of its age. And if the world forgot them, it mattered little. For in the quiet heart of England, beneath the same stars that had once borne witness to their despair, Eleanor and Alexander lived not as legend or caution, but simply as two souls who had chosen to be kind despite the world's unkindness. Their story was not of triumph or tragedy, but of something rarer, the peace that comes when love ceases to be a rebellion and becomes a home.